And we're now live on YouTube with the July 15th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We are joined here by a number of members of the team. And we have a fairly full agenda today, which I will, for one more time, drop into the chat so everyone can see. And if you could please add your names to the agenda, and then also if anyone can help with notes, that would be greatly appreciated. So is there any announcements that people would like to make before we jump into our agenda? Okay, well, I guess an announcement that I will make, just because I hate dead air, Node 14.6.0 has a release candidate out, two release candidates now actually, and it is targeting to be released tomorrow. It got delayed slightly because we're trying to get V8 8.4 into that release. At the moment, there is an exciting new feature or two related to modules. One is a doc deprecation of module.parent, which has been backported from master. And the other is the inclusion of package imports, a feature that Guy Bedford had been working on. This has not gone out yet, so I would say that if anyone has any other feedback or thoughts about it, this is probably the last moment to get that in. We do not have it on the agenda right now, so we can save it for later. But if folks do have something that they want to talk about regarding package imports, say it now or forever hold your peace. Or, I guess that's how it's said. So the first thing that we have on the agenda here is ESM modify get format and get source loader hooks. This is number 34144. This is actually a pull request from Julian Londano. Julian, did I say your last name correctly?
Yep, that's correct.
Oh, phew. And Julian, what we usually do in these meetings, you are a newer person to the meetings. We've got, we usually introduce the item, and we usually have the person who owns the pull request or open the issue to introduce it. So would you like to introduce this change?
Sure. So the idea behind here, it was something I ran into while building this tool, building out right now for my intern project. The idea is that I wanted to find a way to resolve modules, resolve resources, but kind of after the fact, and after. So the four hooks with the resolve and get format and get source and transform source kind of run in that order. And so what the change hopes to do is not change behavior as it exists, but kind of amend it so that the get source hook can kind of override the get format by providing an optional format there. An example there would be maybe a resource is coming from an HTTP request there, and so you wouldn't want to make that request once and get format to get that format, and then make it again in the get source hook to actually get the source there. So that's the idea.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this? No one? Bueller? So I think that with where this is at right now, and just kind of like looking at this, it hasn't been touched in about 15 days. Julian, was there particular feedback that you were looking for to kind of move this forward and get it out of a draft, or is it kind of ready to continue moving forward?
Sure. I think what happened was I thought it kind of stalled out because I thought it turned into a bigger conversation of what I guess a conversation behind are these the final hooks that will be moved out of kind of experimental and more into production. So I thought it had turned into a bigger conversation, and therefore it kind of stalled out. But so I wasn't sure how to move forward with it. And yeah.
Okay. Does anyone who is a little bit more embedded in the loader API have any opinions or guidance for Julian here?
Julian, I'm just wondering, have you been following Gus's PR on loader composition?
Yeah, so that was something I checked out, delved into it weeks ago, but haven't checked it out more recently. And I know it's definitely kind of touches an idea of my project, and kind of definitely used it for context, but I haven't looked at it too recently. No. Is that something I should? Yeah.
I think the real question here is something that I think came up in some side channels as well, which is, are we expecting loaders to be generally stateful? So for example, are we expecting loaders to track metadata during get format, keep it in memory somehow, so that they don't have to repeat operations for get source? Or do we want to design the hooks in a way that allows loaders to have minimal state themselves? And in the first class, the question would be, to me, is there some primitive lacking that allows loaders to safely store metadata without having to worry about leaking memory? If, for example, it calls get format, but then never calls get source on that loader again. And now the metadata has to be just retained forever because the loader doesn't know that it doesn't need it anymore.
I think unloading is probably a slightly separate concern, because I mean that also gets onto a more general point about module metadata being, or module objects being non-GCable currently. But
so very specifically here for the HTTP loader example, the HTTP loader has to do the HTTP request in get format to actually know what the format is of the thing. But then it has to retain the response somehow because it needs the same response during get source, which is, I think, the crux of why the pull request exists, why Julian wanted to have a way for get source to also return the format so he doesn't need to worry about it.
I guess, and I suppose it interacts fine with the loader composition, does it? So I mean, it fits the model for loader composition. It doesn't violate any of the sort of authority stuff we've been trying to set up there. I'm wondering if there's any weird edge cases where if you compose a loader that does get format with something that does this kind of hook. I don't think there are any. I'm just wondering if you've thought those cases through.
I would still kind of, I completely honest there. I hadn't thought thoroughly through too many edge cases there, and especially about how this PR would interact with the compositional type of stuff that you were talking about before.
Yeah, I think for me the question there is, because I think in one of the comments I also pointed out that there's some real weirdness. If we introduce this, that get source can return sometimes a format, then the question becomes, what does the default implementation in Node of get source do? Does it return a format? Does it not return a format? In the cases where it would return a format like built in, does it actually return a source then, or does get source return a format but not source? So I think we can design something that works. The question is kind of, what do we think should the priority be? Do we, again, kind of coming back to the question earlier, do we think it is more important to have get format as a separate step in the pipeline, or do we think it is more important to allow loaders to not require keeping state about the resolution. Oh, about the loading, I guess.
Do you see any other downsides apart from these potential compositional or just the fact that it's providing two ways to do the same thing? Are there any other downsides apart from just that slight increase in complexity?
You mean to the change that is proposed in the PR?
Yeah.
I think nothing, as far as I'm aware, nothing insurmountable. Definitely some things that need to be worked out if we decide that this is something we think is desirable. But I will admit that I haven't 100% looked into all the corner cases.
Well, then it sounds like maybe just digging into some of those cases a bit and being sure that they work out would be worthwhile. And then, I mean, the other thing I would suggest is on a PR like this, it would be nice to see the documentation to kind of outline maybe some of these things and then also the usability around it. Personally, I don't have anything in principle against it. I mean, I'm probably a +0 on it. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what others think. Is that enough information to like be able to move forward with things and work on the PR further, or are there any other questions around this or feedback that you're looking for?
No, yeah, I think that discussion there so far is helpful, and I do think enough to delve into it more and document more about any pros and cons that might come with it. So I can delve into it more with this information. Yep.
Good.
Great, thank you, everyone. So the next one, so it looks like we have no notes that were taken during this discussion. Would someone who is active in that discussion and knows the points, would they please be willing to go and input just even a summary in there would be really greatly appreciated. The next item that we have on here is special treatment for package JSON resolution and exports. We had a second agenda item for adding an API for the package dir that I shoved in here as like a reference because I believe that these two are closely related. If folks disagree, we can split them out into two separate topics again. Taking a look here, I think that this issue was opened originally by someone who is not on the call, and the API one was also opened by someone, by Jordan. Jordan, would you like to introduce this topic?
Sure. Let me see if I can find. Is there like a link issue number or something?
Yeah, I mean, like you don't even necessarily need to review the issue. I think it's just basically around the package exports and package JSON and what we're going to do about it. But Darcy dropped the links into the chat.
Thank you. Perfect. So the root of the issue, as I recall, is that the addition of exports, which does not include package JSON by default, means that that there is no longer a reliable way to get at the metadata for a package at the package JSON, or get at any files that are in the package directory. Previously, the way you would always do that is just require package name / or require.resolve it, and then you get, you could do package name / package.json and require that in, or you could require.resolve package name with a / and then you could use fs operations to access whatever file you wanted. The ability to do those fs operations is completely unrelated to the encapsulation that exports is intended to provide. So, for example, saying that these are my 3 entry points for my package in using the exports field, that's restricting my Semver API. You can still go nuts and explore my packages file system But if I change that and break your script, like that's on you. The file system is not part of the API contract. So that's always worked. So the issue is that if I put package.json in my exports, then people can just require it, and tools can get the version number, or they can, figure out from the package.json, they can figure out, well, what's the project directory, and then do their FS stuff. Similarly, if a package's main is in the root directory, you can require .resolve the package name and then assume that that's the directory, and work from there. And similarly, if the thing you require .resolve is in a directory that contains either no nested package JSONs, like the first package JSON you find as you traverse upwards is the project one, then you're good. Or if the first package JSON you find with like a name or a version, like if you can use heuristics to guess where the project directory's package JSON is, then you're also good. But if there's any situation where it's hard/impossible to distinguish a nested package JSON from the project root package JSON, then it becomes impossible to generically access the location of the package directory. So one of the things that was talked about was, oh, why don't we automatically expose package.json in the exports? And there's a number of us that don't think that's a good idea, primarily because that's not first, because the intention of the exports field is to make all entry points explicit choices. And that kind of defeats that. So it seems like what would kind of address the issue simpler, or in a way that does not conflate any module stuff with package stuff, would be any sort of API that lets you get access, given a bare identifier, what's the directory that package JSON lives in effectively. You can either, it doesn't matter if you're saying, give me the package JSON for this identifier, this bare identifier, but probably the most straightforward or the most clean would be just give me the path on the file system that this is. And this would be an API that, things that patch Node to not have a file system. So like Yarn 2, I think, and Tink and a few other, but those types of approaches, they could then patch this API and provide, and do whatever they need to do. But the result would be that once this API exists, any tooling can just start using it and no longer will have to rely on arguably abusing require to be able to get access to the package directory and thus the package JSON inside it. That's my summary.
So just to clarify, are you proposing an API for this?
Yeah, so I don't remember if I said something specific. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually feel too strongly about exactly how it's spelled, like where it lives and what the word is, right? I mean, like resolve package root is a totally fine name, right? And we could put it on the module object, module.resolve package root. That seems fine to me. I think there's a lot of folks that aren't me that have a much better concept of all of Node and like where stuff really belongs. But literally just an API that takes an identifier and spits back something that can give me a file system path. It can be a URL object. It could be a promise for a URL object. Like the exact semantics aren't really as important. I think there's probably tooling that does need it to be synchronous, so it would probably be useful to have it be synchronous. But other than that, it seems it would basically be just like require.resolve with a bare identifier and a / attached if there were no exports field. But it shouldn't live on require because it's not related to modules. Does that, Guy, I'm not making a concrete suggestion because I don't know exactly what would be best. But if we agree that this API would be good, then we can do some bike sheds in the GitHub thread about where it would be best to load.
Certainly, yeah. No, I was just wanting to understand what stage this work was at. But yeah, I think in principle that sounds like a useful feature.
Cool.
Would you imagine that this could be an API that could live on like the module interface? So it could be like get package, like module.get package JSON or something like that, or module. Like what are you imagining it would be?
Yeah, I mean, well, so Node itself, I think, caches some of the things from package.json, but I don't think it caches the entirety of the file. Correct me if that's wrong. And so there's not like necessarily an existing cache to leverage.
Yeah.
And then is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'm assuming that folks would not be content with expanding whatever Node does cache to include the entire package.json. So like, yeah, something on the module interface, it could be a static function on the module, or it could be, you know, like the module instances that are stored in require.cache, right? It could be just an instance method on one of those, right? It seems like it'd be nice, like an instance method on one of those is probably might be a good way to cache it, because then like it's part of the require cache. But you know, because there is some require resolution happening here, and this, you know, obviously, as I say require, like it would be the similar approach for import. But it seems like just a top level like static function, you know, that perhaps leverage the module cache to you know, when available, to call the instance method or something like that. Something like that would work. Does that seem workable? I'm not super familiar with the internals here, so I don't know how viable these approaches are.
I think for me at least, yeah, like Darcy talks about resolve package root. I think that, oh, Jan, you have your hand up. Sorry about that. Go first.
Yeah, +1 on the resolve package root name. I think it would be nice to have it available to ES modules. So if you write a tool that is written in ES module syntax, that you can have access to it easily. But as long as it's exposed from the module as a static function somehow, I think it would then need a second argument of the context, like what is the file path and or URL of the thing that is trying to find the package. But I think that might be acceptable for those tools as overhead.
I absolutely think it would be. And since in CommonJS, you would, like, if we did it that way, like resolve package root, specifier, comma, like, you know, context or whatever name for that argument, like in CommonJS, you would pass under dir name, and in, you know, in ESM, you'd pass import.meta.url, right? So like, that seems very straightforward to me.
So do we have anyone who wants to maybe take this up as an action? Like Jordan, do you have any bandwidth to work on a feature like this if you have a little bit of someone to help support you
Yeah, I
through
can
it?
dig into it, but I'll definitely need some hand holding. And we can coordinate offline with whoever is volunteering.
Yeah, I'd be willing to help to some capacity, and I'm sure some other people could pitch in.
Cool.
Could be a good, like, constructive addition to Node if you were looking to make something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll probably, you know, I've just in terms of the schedule, and TC39 is next week, so probably the week after that is when I would maybe have time to start looking at it. But I'll certainly try and do that.
Okay, cool. So are we good for the next topic now? Next up, we have CJS exports detection. Guy, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yeah, I can do that. So we discussed it for many years now, and we have a PR to do a WASM-based detection of CommonJS. It's kind of a heuristical method based on reading the token stream of the syntax, and where it sees exports dot or export module.exports equals, or exports equals object literal without complex expressions. So it's very heuristical. It'll detect those exports, and then we're able to get named exports from CommonJS modules. And this seems so far like the approach that we've got the most consensus for, but we don't have consensus for it. I think most people seemed in agreement, and at the last meeting, it was discussed to kind of put it behind a flag and get some implementer feedback. and see if people like it and if people want to merge it in. At the moment, Gus is currently still against the feature, even flagged, unfortunately. So unless we want to, in some way, either override that or overrule that either through this group or the TSC, it's looking likely that it's kind of hit a final roadblock on this approach for now, and that we're not going to be able to move forward with it. So I guess the questions are, does anyone feel strongly about trying to continue to overrule in being able to ship something behind a flag to get further feedback on it, or if we just let this one lie now at this point?
Anyone? No strong feelings here?
Shall we just say, let's let it lie and call that one, call it a day on this?
Does anybody feel strongly about not letting it lie?
I mean, like, when we talk about letting it lie, we're saying that we're going to essentially put it down and then not pick it back up, and then give up on actually having named exports for CommonJS modules. Is that what the actual full resolution is there? Like, what's the follow-up?
That would be the strict definition of let it lie. But I believe we have until, is it September, Miles, for the end of LTS on 12? It's kind of like if we want to push it and we just let it lie, like it is kind of, once it gets past that deadline, then it's the window kind of closes on it.
End of October is when we're looking at 12 moving into maintenance. It doesn't mean that we can't explore these things on future versions, although I do think having like that as like a pretty big difference in being in 12 and 12 still having like 2 more years of support would maybe make it a little harder to make those changes in other versions. Now, for what it's worth, even when something is in maintenance, we still could explore making broader changes. Like, we just need to build consensus between the release team and potentially the TSC if we wanted to make those changes, but they are a lot harder. But we have historically with something like NAPI, for example, done NAPI updates into maintenance LTS releases to keep NAPI in sync across all the release lines. So while I think that it is not ideal, there is prior art here that we could point to about making a change like that after it's in maintenance.
And it is relatively backwards compatible, if I remember correctly, right? There's no breaking change really in here.
No, there's not really a breaking change unless you're relying on like iterating over the keys of the module you import and you don't know whether the module you import is CommonJS or ESM or not.
Yeah. But we're not changing existing bindings, we're only introducing new ones, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think the big concern I have about punting on it is that I'm not aware of any other known solution to transitive transpiled module graphs. So where 2 packages are referring to each other, they are written using ESM syntax and then transpiled to CommonJS, which is relatively common. And I think this is one of the few things that makes it relatively palatable and non-breaking, unless you want to restrict everything to just using default exports ever. So I'm a bit afraid that we don't have a good story in general for how ESM adoption, native ESM adoption works in that kind of module graph. And I'm not aware of any alternatives that yet, at least.
I mean, my primary question is if we stop pursuing this, what do we pursue next? Because, yeah.
So, I mean, the other thing to reconsider would be a full dynamic iteration with out of order execution, but I believe that's still ruled off from a consensus point of view. I also have concerns about the sort of complete dynamic iteration, possibly. I don't see personally another approach to pursue after this, unless someone else wants to take a stab at something.
I mean, not having a way to do named exports from CommonJS seems like a problem.
We do have a way to do it. It's just blocked.
Okay, yes, okay. Not shipping a way to do named exports from CommonJS seems problematic because people kind of expect to have them. Minimally, we will be failing user expectations on many fronts.
Then, Wesley, would you like to suggest that we escalate either within this group or to the TSC to see if we can overrule this block on shipping something flagged to get further feedback?
Even if it, like either that or like acquire consensus to like pursue one of our other solutions for named exports, yeah. Like if we have people blocking on all of the solutions, we need to override one of those blocks if we do have some degree of consensus that we need named exports.
Well, on this, there is only one block. On out of order execution and dynamic iteration, I believe we have more blocks. So this does seem the most viable to me, personally.
Well, it's worth, I think, thinking about not counting blocks, but like thinking about the categories of the objections, or like the spirit of them, right? So like the ones about out of order execution are because like it violates the intention of the spec, and that seems pretty bad as a concept, regardless of whether you think, even if you think that this specific instance is okay. The objections to the thing we're discussing now are largely in the concept around the concept of it being heuristic based, meaning that it's not precise and could like change in a bad way in the future. Like
it would be backwards compatible, so it would never change in future. I think Gus's concern is more that it's not fully accurate. So firstly, it might not detect all the exports. Secondly, it might detect exports which are not actually exports. And thirdly, he has a refactoring objection, which is that you might not realize that, for example, refactoring your code to use a class with static methods or something isn't going to make those named exports like they were when they were exports dot expressions.
But I mean, I think that the more helpful thing to probably think about, for me anyway, is if we ship this in whatever form, what as a developer do I have to keep in my head to make sure that when I'm writing CommonJS, that named exports are there? And similarly, when I'm importing a CommonJS module and like there are or are not named exports, I mean, I guess that's just going to be try it and see. But so it's more about the authoring side. So it's like if it means you can't have named exports if it's a class, only if it's an object literal or something. Like if it's a simple rule to follow, even then it's still, you could still argue it's surprising. That's the refactoring objection, but like that's at least
at this
something
point,
to keep in your head.
The only other like fourth option would be a like quite literally some kind of static metadata, you know, where users can put more metadata into their packages to.
Yeah, we have no reason to do that because if you were going to do that, you could just write an ESM wrapper for your package.
Right.
Moreover, there's an expectation that you don't need to do that generally.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you're willing to put metadata, you're probably just going to be willing to write an ESM wrapper file.
Okay. Like, so I guess we have two options then, well, three options then. We can we could bring this up with the TSC. We could vote on it as a group, or we could, as far as I'm concerned, like the other option is quite literally to just let it lie. I don't see another option personally, unless someone else wants to suggest another option.
Which again, letting it lie unfancily means abandoning named exports for CommonJS.
I would agree it does. I might have less of a negative opinion, but I do think if we have precedent of trying to land features and them getting blocked based upon not being complete, so that's one of the reasons why the REPL has a flag for enabling await in it, because it does alter semantics slightly. So it wasn't considered complete, and it doesn't really have a path to removing that flag ever. But we did land it behind a flag. I'm curious if there are any specific objections if we have a vote just for it flagged, and we can work towards feedback there rather than trying to state that when we ship it flagged, it's expected to be unflagged eventually.
Just to try and read into Gus's opinion here, I think what he's saying is that he doesn't think he would ever permit this heuristical method because he sees it as imperfect, and that it does not have, he kind of sets a bar at that it should be able to get 95% accuracy, which it simply cannot. So there is no path to getting through his block, even.
Oh, I have a really terrible solution that can get you 95% accuracy. Read all interned strings in the VM and make all of them exported names. Technically, that will get you every export.
That will also explode memory usage.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if his accuracy includes negatives or not.
Exactly. But like, the point is, like, technically, you could say that a CommonJS module re-exports every name available, right? And then all of the exports are there, and you still have the same behavior you expect for CommonJS for things that aren't actually there, just undefined. The issue has always been just attempting to satisfy the stupid specification and, like, you know, provide a reasonable user experience. Like, nobody requiring a CommonJS module is going to expect an early error from the imports from a CommonJS module simply because the imports don't exist yet, can't provide early errors.
Yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to at least put it behind a flag so that we can get wider feedback, because I don't think this is a decision that should be up to Gus. I think it's a decision that should be made by users and people who are in a position to test it out and give feedback, and then we can make it that wider decision.
Perhaps moreover, even if you disagree on the exact implementation of the named exports methodology, having an implementation, even an incomplete one, still paves the way for replacing it with a complete one later.
I do not believe this is a path towards a complete one, just to be clear.
Yeah, as long as
if you want to test whether users want the feature, the incomplete implementation still works for that.
So far as
that is not what I'm seeking by shipping a flag. I'm seeking to alleviate pain for essentially using ES modules. I'm not seeking to have some sort of ulterior motive to have a different implementation or solution eventually in the future based upon the fact that we already know people do want named exports from CommonJS.
I mean, the other thing is the fact that users want it. I mean, users wanted to transpile CoffeeScript on install also. Like, that's very important things to consider. But users wanted does not mean like we must give it or should automatically. Like in this case, I hope we find a way to make it work. But like, you know, I don't think that, you know, people want a lot of things, and sometimes
let's not use the word want. Let's use the word expect. Users expect it. People don't expect Node to run CoffeeScript on install. People expect, from how ESM has been introduced to them, to have named exports from common JS modules.
Well, and I think that's part of the
And that's
challenge here, right?
and that's a much stronger bar, all right? A much stronger one.
I agree, and I think the challenge here is that when users have an expectation for that on specific packages and not on other specific packages, and the way to determine that is not runtime reflection of the module.exports only. It is that combined with reading the documentation and like inferring as a human what the author intended, right? And so there's like that, like Jeffrey did a lot of heroic research work to try and figure this out, and like it's really difficult to actually even measure how good a job those expectations are being met. Like I want them to be met, but it's like I have module.exports values with other properties on a number of my packages, and there is one export on those packages. Named exports should not work on those, right? But like I don't know. I think it's I don't have specific objections around that here. I'm just saying kind of like the reason it's a challenging problem is because user expectations do not follow a simple algorithm.
We could embed all of definitely typed into the build of Node.js and then extract exports data from it.
Yeah, if you want a guideline for where people have actually gone through and read the documentation and figured out what to expect from the package, definitely typed does give you that information. But
I mean, I wonder if you could look at the definitely typed packages and then build up a report saying of all the things indefinitely typed that have named exports or don't, here is how the PR performs. Like that might be a more convincing argument to those who object to it. But
the interesting thing about definitely typed is that it also captures another level of expectation beyond what like a heuristic is expected to find. Definitely typed also explicitly elides exports, which are not supposed to be exported by documentation. So things like internal fields, things that are labeled as for test only, those are explicitly left off on definitely typed because the maintainers have, comments or something indicating that they want them gone. However, for a named exports implementation, you'd kind of expect them to be there because, again, if it's only available for test, it's only supposed to be elided in documentation, like the completions that TypeScript provides. It should still be there in the runtime. And so even definitely typed doesn't actually capture everything Node is supposed to get. It's just like a minimum set.
Mm-hmm.
So one thought here of a direction that we could go, and I know people aren't going to necessarily love this, but as our loader implementation begins to become more and more stabilized, and it feels like we're getting somewhere, especially with the composable loader stuff. One possible route to take this, especially if we're thinking about like using definitely typed or other third parties, would be like writing loaders that can accomplish what we're talking about here, that kind of go above and beyond what Node's based loader does, and potentially even doing things that are not 100% accurate or not spec compliant. Guy, like perhaps what you are working on or had been working on, although I know it involved using internals, so that may not work. But the idea here being like perhaps we could have a subset of kind of blessed loaders and workflows that we just ship directly with Node, where it would be like, hey, like the default experience doesn't allow this, but you can always use one of these built-in loaders. And Brad, I think this is kind of similar to what you were suggesting as far as flags are concerned.
This is what it is. This is where I point out that using a built-in loader is no different than using a flag, right?
It's actually not possible with a loader because our common JS loader injects its modules into the ES module loader. So they bypass the loader. So it's not actually hookable right now.
But a built-in loader would be different than a flag because you could control the order in which loader is executed, and you could run your own loader first or second.
Yeah, it's slightly better thought out flags, but the point is it's the non-default user experience, and so nobody interacts with it unless they read a guide online that tells them to use it.
I guess like the big difference that I would see between a flag and a loader would be that a blessed shipped loader, even if it is not the default, is not treated as like an experimental thing, or like not like it's not default, but it's not experimental. It also like can have like it is official-ish, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's just not the default. And I think like the use case where this becomes interesting, at least to me, is it means that most modules and libraries will not use this pattern which keeps us with an ecosystem that is like consistent and reliable, but allows application authors at the top level of their packages to have working modes that are potentially more convenient for them within their application that they're building. It's not ideal. It's just a different approach.
It would still be a way to explore and at least get feedback. I mean, if we could document that the loader is what we are considering officially merging, and if we were actually to then build awareness around testing it and get some more feedback and then use that to determine if we wanted to ever unflag it, that could be a route. But if we don't put in that effort and it's just entirely left to user land, then it is still kind of making the decision not to make it a default feature. But just to dig in very briefly, if you require a module before you import it through the ES module loader, it's already put into the ES module loader, so you don't actually get to hook it because of the snapshotting. So I could separate the part of this PR that disables the snapshotting to allow this to work as a loader, which it doesn't right now because of this edge case. Bradley, would you object to that?
So to be clear, this would mean mutations would be observable if you mutate in CommonJS prior to it being imported, you would see the mutation.
Exactly.
And so it would mean that CommonJS modules do not have a static shape, correct?
Yeah, or the shape would be determined at the time that the ES module loader requests them and the ES module loader hooks run against them. And that time becomes the variable.
Without any hook into CommonJS, I would not want to see that. If that is the only way we can move forward with perhaps named exports from CommonJS, I'd rather have named exports from CommonJS if it comes down to that.
I mean, in theory, there could be a new loader hook called prepare CommonJS module for ES module loader that is run every time you require something.
I think that would be easier if we could move stuff so that we could actually do a blocking operation in loaders a little bit better. But to be clear, if we want to make that hook, I would not need it up front. I just need, basically, if we have that change and it lets us have named exports, I would not object at all, even if we don't eventually get that hook.
So the PR would remove the snapshotting entirely, so mutations would be permitted, and then possibly later on we could have. So the problem is when you require before you've imported, and if you're going to be injecting it early into the cache, or injecting it early into the cache with some special hook, because if you design this as a loader, you're probably going to treat the CommonJS as an ES module or something, and then have a kind of a proxy interface.
So we have some old slide decks. We've got like 3 or 4 slide decks on exactly doing this, but I wouldn't focus too much on it. Basically, I'm just stating we don't need the hook right now, but if removing the snapshot makes it easier to move forward with named exports, we should do that.
Okay, I could do a basic PR for that and
very quick point of order. Sorry to interrupt y'all. We only have 2 minutes left. As a conclusion to this topic for the moment, I'd like to propose that it seems like the sentiment is not that we want to let this that we want to let this lie and that we want to continue to do work to enable this use case. Do people think that? Do people agree with that?
Yes. Do we know if we have an alternative to finding a TSC decision on whether the block is valid or not?
I don't like
whatever you want to phrase it.
I don't think that they're like personally, and I recognize there's a bias as I am a TSC member. I do not see any value whatsoever in going to the TSC about this. The last time that we tried to take a module related discussion to the TSC, the response from the TSC was, okay, spend some time educating us and getting us up to speed on what this means. And then after that, it was basically like, okay, well, we don't have enough context. You tell us what to do. So I think that, and I guess maybe this goes back to some of the discussions we had about chartering and a reason why we could consider being chartered. I think that we need to, as a group, figure out a path forward and a solution here and not be making like an appeal to authority to try to help us figure it out, because
Right.
It's not going to help.
But then, I mean, the other option is a vote. And also, I mean, not to be difficult about it, but I mean, one of the requirements of a block is being available for discussion. And Gus was very clear about the fact that he wasn't going to be participating in this meeting today. I just think that, especially in a situation in which a block is not being actively, actively move forward in terms of being able to have those discussions, that as a group, we should have an alternatives.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are now at time. I would like to suggest that like there's a meta topic here it seems like we're talking about, and it might be prudent for us to open an issue on the modules repo to discuss and tag it to bring it up in the next meeting. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Thank you everyone who